The story is told of a yeshiva student from the old country. He was a very inquisitive student, always pushing his teachers, spotting inconsistencies, and squeezing every bit of meaning out of our sacred texts. One day, on a particularly complex bit of Talmud, the student asked a question that the teacher could not answer. "I have to say," said the teacher, "this is a very good question. To answer it would require knowledge not only of this text and the Torah, but also of some obscure commentaries that I do not know. I do not have those expertise. Perhaps you should ask our town's head rabbi. When you find the answer, please tell me." And so the next day after work and before going to the house of study, our inquisitive young man headed to the town's main synagogue. He knocked on the door and was admitted by the shamus, the man charged with the upkeep of the building and with guarding the time of the very busy rabbi. "I have a question about a text that I would like to ask the rabbi," said our student. "I'm very sorry, but the rabbi is very busy. Surely you should ask your teacher," replied the shamus. "I did already, but he could not answer the question, so he told me to ask the head rabbi." "Very well," answered the shamus. "Let's see if he has a moment." They entered the rabbi's study. He looked up from a parchment that he was writing, smiled, and welcomed the young student. "How can I help you?" he asked. The student thanked the rabbi for taking the time to see him, and then posed his question on the particularly complex bit of Talmud. The head rabbi tilted his head and said, "Well," he stroked his beard, "have you considered?" He furrowed his brow and said, "If only..." But after all of this thinking, he looked our inquisitive friend in the eye and said, "I have to say, this is a very good question. To answer it would require not only knowledge of the text, the Torah, and the obscure commentaries that I know, it would also require knowledge of philosophy and agriculture, which admittedly I do not understand. Perhaps you should go to the nearby city and ask my teacher, who oversees the biggest synagogue there." And so the next day, with train fare from the town's rabbi, our friend boarded a train and rode to the nearby city. When he got off, he was amazed to see that the city had several cobblestone streets and not one, not two, but 3 butcher shops. He found his way to the synagogue and knocked on the door. A skeptical man opened the door, so our friend presented a letter from the rabbi of his hometown. The skeptical man rolled his eyes, but led him through the sanctuary with over 200 seats and down the hall to the rabbi's study. Our friend once again asked his question about this particularly complex bit of Talmud. The rabbi tented his fingers, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply. He stayed like that for 2 very awkward minutes. Slowly he opened his eyes. He looked at our friend and said, "I have to say, this is a very good question. To answer it would require not only knowledge of that text, the Torah, the obscure commentaries, philosophy, and agriculture, all of which I understand, but also knowledge of mystical texts, science, and mathematics. You should go to see the head of the great academy in our capital. I will gladly provide you with the train fare and would be grateful if you brought me the answer." By now you can imagine how our friend traveled and how he marveled at the sights and sounds of the capital city. You can picture the grumpy fellow who answered the big door of the great academy and the need our friend had for a letter of reference. And so now our inquisitive friend finally found himself in front of one of the Gedolim, one of the truly great sages of the day. He presented the question on the particularly complex bit of Talmud and eagerly awaited the response. For surely this wise man knew the text, the Torah, the obscure commentaries, philosophy, agriculture, mystical texts, science, and mathematics. The wise rabbi smiled and nodded his head. He looked at his friend and he said, "This is a very good question, and I do know an answer. But first, I have a question for you." Having traveled many miles and waited many weeks, the student responded, "Anything. Ask me anything." The sage asked, "Why do you want to ruin a perfectly good question with something as simple as an answer?" In that moment, our inquisitive friend smiled, thanked the rabbi, and headed home. Now he no longer needed anything so simple as an answer. He knew the true wisdom lies in questions. We do not live in the old country. We do not study in yeshivas, but their methods of debate and questioning, the ways they honored all sides of an argument and recorded minority opinions, all of that demonstrates the value our tradition places on questions. We live in an answer-obsessed age. We want to know facts and figures. We dissect sports with endless statistics to answer the question of whether a team will win or lose. When we hear about a problem, we want to solve it and quickly as possible. When our children learn, we look at grades and scores to answer the question of how they're learning. We have found ways to access answers instantaneously with Google and Siri and ChatGPT. We study vast data sets to find patterns that give us answers to questions we did not even know to ask. We are answer-obsessed. And our obsession with answers has actually brought us many blessings. When a patient presents a symptom, doctors can do a miraculous job of treating the underlying cause. When a need presents itself, our market finds a way to answer that need. When we need to know how to go somewhere, Google or Waze not only gives us many routes, but tells us which route has the least traffic. The answer to questions allow us to drive cars, fly around the world, launch satellites into space, and produce safe food. But answers are not always the answer. Questions open our minds. Answers close them. Questions start a search. Answers end it. Questions make us curious about a range of ideas. Answers can extinguish our curiosity. Questions encourage us to engage with other people. Answers require no one. Questions make us flex our brains. Answers simply register. Questions can make us wonder, can instill a sense of awe. Answers are abrupt. Questions engage us, and answers cut us loose. The first place we learn our obsession with answers is in school. Rather than expand the curiosity and intellectual vigor of our children, administrators demand that lessons train our kids to give the right answer on the test. Our grading system, in some ways a necessary evil, imposes artificial metrics on the joy of learning. It tells our children that what matters is not what you know, but how much you know. This demonstrates but one type of intelligence, one way of engaging with the world. Knowledge and ideas, wisdom and expression come in every shade of the rainbow. If only our schools could refract the natural curiosity of children through the wondrous prisms of questions, instead of forcing their light into black boxes of answer-driven conformity. Sometimes we fail to offer comfort to loved ones when they need it. We fail by answering instead of listening. Our loved ones may need to express, to yell, to rant, to cry, to be heard. But we are often not content to listen. We feel the need to answer, to problem solve, to tell them what to do. Sometimes people want our advice. But unless they explicitly ask for answers, what people usually need is for us to listen as they question their circumstances. The problem of answers is extreme when it comes to religion. How often religious certainty has alienated the faithful. How frequently religious arrogance has divided families and communities. How often religious dogmatism has led to bloodshed and war. Of all the fields of human endeavor, of all the fields of inquiry, how could humans ever assert certainty in matters of the Spirit? To claim to know the nature of God is at best foolish and at worst deadly dangerous. Can you imagine if the human mind could understand God's infinite nature? Answers about God have only ever ended with oppression. But questions about God can open worlds of compassion and kindness. Meditations on God, seeking God, yearning for God, these bring people together in a search. They expand our minds to possibilities. They quiet our consciousness and calm our souls. Concrete answers to religious questions diminish the soul, feed our cynicism, and lead to arrogance. Humble questions about holiness and divinity lead to goodness and peace. We have natural dispositions and inclinations. Some of us like to contemplate, and some of us like to cut to the chase. Some of us act before thinking, and some of us never stop thinking. Most of us are more comfortable with the concrete solidity of answers than the vagaries and uncertainties of questions. And still, it is the questions of life that bring us the most meaning. We spend money to go to sporting events not for the results, but for the playing time when we breathlessly ask over and over again, who will win? We go to concerts not for the set list, but to hear what song might come next. What new lighting effect will they use? How will the virtuoso interpret the classic piece? The classes that we remember are not the ones we could pass in our sleep. They're the ones that made us think, that made us see the world in new ways because of the questions that they posed. Answers narrow our worldview, and sometimes we do need that. But questions broaden our worldview, and we always need that. There is no doubt that we need answers and the many miracles that they bring with them. And there is no doubt that there are times and places when the wisdom of a question can bring us more meaning than any answer possibly could. These next 10 days, these coming days of awe, let us seek not answers or decisions. Seek not finite solutions or definitive resolutions. Instead, let our liturgy and our reflections, our music and our thoughts, let them all open up the grand possibilities of our world and our lives. Let us read the proclamations of the High Holy Day prayers as questions rather than statements. Let those questions lead to new, fresh pathways, clear and sweet and peaceful. If we find the questions embedded in our prayers, surely our spirits will soar. Dear God, may the questions raised by our worship allow these high holy days to be days of broadening. May the vistas that the questions open up inspire us to blessings and goodness in the year to come. And may we all resist the temptation to ruin good questions with anything so simple as an answer. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will.